Good morning, everyone. Sports Day 2012, named after a famous old building in Kensington, obviously. Going to give you some context, those of you that haven't seen it, this background discussion before, thank you. And then go into how we're going to move a very large number of spectators, and I'll show you just how many, and then how we're progressing to get to the infrastructure we need to do that. Essentially, the Olympics is effectively the biggest show on earth. There's nothing else comes close except a world war in the number of people voluntarily moving into one country and then attending a number of visits. To give you an example, the World Cup about to happen shortly, the Football World Cup, will attract just under 2 million. The Paralympics, which follows the Olympics now, is the third largest event in the world, surprisingly. Just short in terms of attendance of the Football World Cup. And another interesting fact is more disabled people go to the main Olympics than they do to the Paralympics. That's something we found out pretty early on. So over 200 countries, just under 8 million people expected to attend to come to the events themselves. There'll be a lot more than that coming just for the cultural events and just for the experience of being there. That's the difficult bit to forecast. Paralympics, about a quarter of the size overall in terms of spectators, but still a major event. The challenge we were faced with for London 2012, London 2012 is the very first Olympic Games to have sustainability and legacy objectives built in to the requirements for the Games. So everything we needed to do, or as much as we could, needs to have some useful benefit following the Games, or needs to be built in a green way. Various ways of interpreting that. We also are very, very aware that we need to keep London moving during the Games. Normally, in any Olympic Games, there is a drop in background demand of something between 20 and 30%. We're hoping to get it up to 30% by working with employers and companies to persuade people to work differently or take those 2 weeks off or whatever. But nevertheless, a large number of people still want to get to work or do other things besides the Olympics, and we've got to take that into account. And we've also, along with the legacy of East London and elsewhere, got to try and do it best value that we can. Who's doing what? Just in case you're not aware, the Games themselves are run as a commercial operation, and each Games has an organising committee, in this case, LOCOG, London Organising Committee, is funded basically by commercial sponsorship. The Olympic Delivery Authority is funded essentially by London ratepayers, by lottery payers, and by direct tax. So we're a government-funded body, essentially delivering the infrastructure to allow the IOC through LOCOG to actually run the Games in 2012. Obviously, what we're doing is done a lot through others, and especially Transport for London, Network Rail, and the train operating companies, in terms of spectator transport and a lot of other things done through the Highways Agency and obviously the emergency services. The Games are largely centred in East London at Stratford. That's where the main stadium and some of the largest venues will be, but it's also taking place all over London, as you can see from that. A lot of the smaller events like beach volleyball, which I'm always asked about at Horse Guards Parade, for example, and archery at Lord's, and obviously you've heard all about what's going on at Greenwich and Woolwich. Out at Eton Dorney, the main rowing events, and here at Windsor. Hadley Farm, the most mountainous county in Britain, Essex, will have the mountain biking, obviously. And further afield, I won't show the slides, we've got sailing where we might actually win something at Weymouth and Portland, and at various football stadia for the heats building up to the football finale at Wembley. But that's for another time. I'll concentrate on spectator transport within my 20 minutes. The Games is not easy to, it's not like just holding a football match event. Lots of different things happening around the country and around London at different times. And essentially, the East London venues don't, or certainly the Stratford main stadium venue, which is represented by the orangey figures doesn't really come into its own. The main track and field events don't start until the end of week 1, essentially over 17 days. So you've got a lot of the football heats happening outside London, a lot of the other heats in the various sports in week 1, and then the games builds up and centralises further and further towards week 2. So we usually talk about days 7 and 8 as our busiest days. It's not the opening and closing ceremony, because that's just the capacity of the Olympic Stadium, which is 80,000 plus people milling around. So it's when the maximum number of events are on. So days 7 and 8 is where we take our maximum demand from, and that's what we're trying to plan our capacity to. In the morning peak, if we took Stratford Station as an example, a typical morning peak at the moment would see it handling around between 37 and 40,000 people. During peak games time, day 7 of the games, we're going to try and handle something approaching 140,000. To handle that, we're going to try and create, or on the way to creating capacity for around 240,000. Part of the reason London was chosen, and particularly East London was chosen, was its transport links. The other main reason was it was the last major piece of a capital city that was bidding for the Olympics, where there was a very large area suitable for redevelopment and for creating the new stadia. 10 tube and rail lines and light rail lines serving it. In fact, there'll be 11 by the time we've finished, if you count the additional DLR line. The 3 gateway stations we're talking about, 2 well-known, obviously, Stratford International, which I'll talk about in a minute, and Stratford Regional Station, we have to refer to it now, but also West Ham, which will serve District and Hammersmith and City arrivals, as well as C2C. 80% of those 8 million spectators will be expected to use rail, or light rail, or tube. So one of the very first things that was considered as part of the bid was what was already planned to go on in this area, already because of Canary Wharf to some extent, and because of shopping development proposed on the old railway lines at Stratford, driven by an Australian developer, Westfield. There was already a fundamental reason to upgrade the infrastructure in East London, and also there was a regeneration plan sitting in the wings. There were several rail plans, a very ambitious one for rebuilding Stratford Station, which unfortunately nobody could afford, but lots of other plans to upgrade the North London line, for example, the old Cinderella line, and DLR extensions and so forth. 4 years ago, High Speed 1, as it is now known, had dug its hole through the centre and was starting to run Eurostar, but the station box there hadn't seen much construction. But you see the spoil next to that box as actually came out of High Speed 1 tunnels and was dumped at Stratford to get everything above the water table, because obviously it was a bit of a swamp originally. There's Stratford Regional Station to get your bearings in the red circle. That's the site of what has become Stratford International Station. There's the junction with the what was the junction for the North London line, still partly is, and will become the junction for the DLR extension to Stratford International. And that bit is what's known as the High Meads Loop. All this area used to be at grade. You could see every railway line forms a triangle here before that came along. And a big chunk of High Meads Loop there will be underground, or most of it is now, under a raft covered by 2 sides of the Olympic Village. One of the first jobs we had to do was shut down a set of sidings called Thornton's Field outside Liverpool Street, because it was in the way of the Olympic Stadium construction site. We constructed a new set of sidings to new standards up at Orient Way, which is just next to the Eurostar depot, and that's operational already. That's the old Thornton's Field site, which is now longer. I gather there was something like 96 sidings there originally. There were just 12 operational when we came along and shut it down.